I'm continuing my interview with Dustin Black. We are doing our position 360s, and now we're going to tackle the safeties. Dustin, thanks for being here.
Yeah, glad to be here.
So last year's safety, I think it could have not been so good, and it sort of worked out. And I think the thing to talk about there is that two freshmen really emerged. Khalil Barnes, obviously the hot topic, played as a true freshman, played 504 snaps. 78 PFF grade, 3 picks. He was obviously great. And then Kylon Griffin came on a little bit later, 2 picks, 156 snaps, even higher PFF grade, 78.3. And then on top of that, you had Mickens, who folks who listen to this channel a lot know I think he's the most underrated player on the defense like every year. And he had a 76 PFF grade. He didn't have any picks, but he was great. And then Jayln Phillips was solid. Not a star, but solid. So that's 4. And then you had Mukuba. He had so much depth, you were able to move him to kind of like that nickel role, and he was much better. So I thought they were great last year. How would you break down their performance?
Yeah, definitely. I really like the safeties last year. I thought they had a really good year. I thought it was the key piece to really getting our secondary back. Obviously the corner's playing a big role, but I think the safety play was awesome. I think that in the bowl game, it was a little scary. I think Jayln Phillips in the bowl game probably had his worst game in a Clemson uniform. Because I'm a big Jayln Phillips guy. I was always thought that he was one of the more underrated players that has come through Clemson, particularly in the run game. I thought he was a really good box safety when he was asked to be, and I really like him. I think he's a big loss to this team that doesn't really get mentioned amongst other defensive players that have departed. But obviously Mukuba, Mickens, Phillips, Barnes, obviously, as you alluded to, I'm really high on Barnes. I think he has a really bright future ahead of him. So I thought the safety play was great. I thought that, getting Kylon Griffin snaps towards the end of the year after Koval tore his ACL was huge. I think him getting some reps and heading into this year, I think he's going to play a major role.
So now coming into the next year, obviously Mukuba's gone, and that's a kind of a particularly weird one worth talking about. I think he's the only legitimate starter that Clemson's lost to another program in what feels like, and I don't have inside information, but it feels like kind of a Billy Amick from the baseball team situation where someone just paid a lot of money in NIL to take him. Is that how you read it? And then more specifically, or more importantly, how big is that loss? Is Clemson okay with, is that recoverable?
Yeah, well, I think the main reason that, and I don't know that this is, 100% true, but I've always heard that he had family back in Texas that needed him back, that he had a kid that he wanted to take more care of and be closer to in Texas, which, you can understand that for a kid his age. But yeah, I think it's definitely a huge loss, and I would definitely classify him as, the one starter that we lost to the transfer portal. And, you'd love to have him this year, but I've always thought Mukuba was a 3-and-done guy anyways. I mean, he started as a freshman, played, as a sophomore, and played as a junior. And I thought that he could have tried, kind of tested the waters in the NFL draft a little bit this year if he wanted to. So not that I was, erasing him off the safety board, but I kind of felt like, yeah, he could go NFL if he wanted to. So the fact that he's playing in Texas kind of doesn't really change how I felt about the safety room all that much.
And that's a good point. If it's about family, that's certainly more commendable. So don't mean to besmirch him there. And yeah, after his freshman year, you definitely thought he was, 3 and gone. But the last 2, particularly his sophomore year, was really poor. And then last year was good, but not elite by any means. So I felt like he was probably coming back, and I certainly didn't expect him to transfer. Obviously, Jayln Phillips, you mentioned, he's with the LA Rams, or at least he signed with them initially. So those are 2 losses there. 2 veteran losses, and then you get back Tyler Venables, who was he was on the team but not healthy to play. So you add him, and then you add 3 freshmen: Ricardo Jones, Noah Dixon, and Joe Wilkerson. So you have a ton of safeties, but you got Mukuba and Phillips gone. How do you see some of those snaps being replaced, both in terms of production and just playing time?
Yeah, well, I think coming into the year, I think you're looking at Mickens and Venables starting, honestly. I think that the experience of Venables is going to be vital, especially when you play a team like Georgia week 1. With Venables and his injuries, you don't know how his athleticism has held up over the years. I think he's a 5th-year guy, kind of had nagging injuries all throughout his career. So from an athleticism standpoint, I don't love him as a starter. But as a, just defensive savant, he's basically a second coach on the field. He could pretty much call the defense if he wanted to. I think, he wore a headset last year while he was injured. And then And then last year, before the Notre Dame game, when Kylon Griffin kind of came on the scene, the reason why he was thrust into duty is because Sherrod Koval was above him in the pecking order, and then he tore his ACL on a Thursday practice. And then Kylon Griffin got thrust into the starting role. So now you got Koval coming back from an ACL tear. Where is he at in his recovery, and where is he at in the pecking order if you already had him above Kylon Griffin last year? Or, did Kylon Griffin, who, proved to be worthy last year of getting meaningful snaps, does he just immediately come in as, even just that guy behind Venables or the guy right behind Mickens is kind of like, part of your two deep. And then you just have a bunch of guys that, like Kylan Webb, Robert Billings, guys like that who have been in the program that you're looking to take that next step. I know that there's been some buzz about Robert Billings a little bit, when in last fall camp. But I also really like Ricardo Jones. I think Ricardo Jones is a safety signee. I think that he's one that I think could have an immediate impact and one that can climb that pecking order pretty quickly. I think as a recruit, he was pretty underrated. I think he was somewhere between the 10th and 12th best safety to the recruiting sites, but I thought he was way closer to the top 5 than he was top 10. Just personally, he's just an absolute ball hawk, an absolute ball maker, or a absolute, just always around the ball, always makes plays. And I think he could possibly be, someone that you look for to have like a really immediate impact as a young starter.
It's funny when you said ball hawk, my mind immediately went to DeAndre McDaniels. The guy was really physical, and he just always seemed to get these interceptions. I know Ricardo Jones might have some better measurables from an NFL standpoint, but man, DeAndre was really fun to watch. I loved him as a player and a coach. And if Ricardo Jones could be anything near that, that'd be awesome. So one guy you mentioned, Sherrod Koval, I won't say I forgot about him, but haven't factored him in a ton. His PFF grades have been pretty low. Do you see him, if he's healthy, playing a pretty big role?
Yeah, I'm not sure. And this is one reason why I'm not too high on this position group heading in this year is I think you just have so many question marks. I think that Mickens is obviously your top dog in that room. And he's obviously, the big time player that you hope he is. But then if you have Venables start next to him, like I said, what is he after all these injuries in his 5th year? And then, what is Kylon Griffin if he wasn't above Koval, last year? I mean, so I think the safety room for me is one of those like prime examples of preseason when people just list names on Twitter or social media and say like, look at our safety room. And it's like, yeah, but like 5 of those guys have never stepped foot on the football field before. So I mean, I like the guys. I think that like, especially like a Kylan Webb who had like legitimate track times coming out of high school. I think he could be a great player. I think Noah Dixon, who could possibly be one of the strongest DBs we have on the roster today as a freshman. I think he could be a great player. The thing is I just don't know. I think that group has a lot of question marks. I think that Mickey Kahn as a coach, he's someone I've done a complete 180 on. I didn't love the hire in 2017 when he got hired, but now with his recruiting in Georgia and how well he's handled the position room of safety, I think he's done a fantastic job. I mean, maybe I should give him a little bit more credit than I'm giving him here. But I think that group has a ton of question marks out of this year. And when you look at the defense as a whole, I think that this is the weakest position on our defense.
Wow, it's really interesting you say that. I don't feel that way, and we'll circle back to that, and we could end with a little debate on that. But I want to talk about 2 guys or I guess 3 guys before we get to that. One would be RJ Mickens. If you didn't watch the linebacker video, be sure to subscribe to this channel because we talked about linebackers and we talked about how Barrett Carter, it feels like after what for Carter was a pretty decent kind of step back, feels like he's going to really go off with a huge kind of NFL send-off year. I kind of see that for Mickens too. He chose to come back. I remember there was chatter like about him transferring to A&M. I don't know if that might have been total baloney, but I remember hearing that or hearing he was going to the NFL, and then he comes back. He's every year at Clemson posts amazing PFF grades, and typically he's kind of a ball hawk, but not last year. And for whatever reason, maybe it's the motivation, kind of like a contract year in the pros, but I just feel like he's going to go off. Are you as optimistic about Mickens as I am?
Yeah, I like Mickens. I think he's a really good player. I don't think that he's anywhere near the top of the draft. I think that he could get drafted, but I don't see him, as like a 2nd or 3rd round guy, especially with how the NFL treats safeties nowadays. But I think that he definitely has a ceiling of getting drafted and being an NFL player. I think that he still has a step to take though, for sure.
So two other guys we've talked about, but you mentioned Tyler Venables starting, and maybe perhaps you're saying with the two safeties, but the nickel's sort of weird because do you count him as a linebacker? Do you count him as safeties? Kind of both. But tell me if I'm wrong, but Khalil Barnes has to start, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Clemson's so whenever I say Mickens and Venables starting, I'm assuming that it's in the nickel. We're in a nickel defense, the 4-2-5 with Barnes at the nickel. And yeah, but I think Barnes is one of the best players on the defense. I think that he is further along than Mukuba was at this point. Mukuba started as a freshman, Barnes started as a freshman. I feel like Barnes is further along as a defensive back prospect or just a nickel prospect in general than Mukuba was heading into his sophomore year.
Well, for as much Mukuba was awesome as a freshman, and so I feel like that, and he was a big prospect, so that gives him a little bit of a halo effect. But he was banged up as a sophomore and was, I'm trying to say this in a respectful way, but not great. His grades were really bad. And then last year he was good, but nothing special. It was like a 70 or 71 PFF grade. I mean, he was fine, but not early NFL pick kind of caliber. So anyway, yes, I agree. I'm really high on Khalil Barnes. I don't think he'll have a sophomore slump. One guy I'm curious about, I don't know if I have a strong opinion of it, but I do think there is a sophomore slump risk with Kylon Griffin. I say that for two reasons. Didn't have a ton of snaps last year, so he looked great, but it's kind of like baseball. You look great in 137 at bats, right? Like how much stock do I put into that? That's kind of him with the snaps. And then he looked not great in that Gator Bowl. Does that give you any worry at all at safety?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, he had some good interceptions. He had an interception in the Notre Dame game, the first game he started. He had an interception in the Georgia Tech game. But those balls just came right to him. It's not like he was, jumping routes and making plays. I mean, not to discredit getting an interception in your first college career start. I mean, it's awesome. Don't get me wrong. But he was just in the right place at the right time. And, I think that he's a good player. He wasn't a huge recruit. But I think that if you look back at how the coaches treated him last year and having him behind the pecking order of a couple of guys, I think that, you kind of hope that he's not your starter heading into this year. And I really just think Venables gets the nod because of his experience and his mindset of knowing the defense and knowing where people are supposed to be, especially when you look at a guy where like Trotter's missing on the field. You kind of want that veteran presence who can kind of get guys aligned and make sure that we're in the right stuff, especially against a team like Georgia week 1.
So, yeah, I think I like the safety room for the kind of the same reason I like the linebacker room. You have some high-end players with Khalil Barnes, RJ Mickens even, but you also have depth. And so what I like is, maybe Khalil Barnes plays some nickel or could play plenty of nickel, right? Mm-hmm. And you could have Kylon or you could have Tyler Venables. But if that doesn't work out, I could also see a scenario where you move Barnes back to a more true safety role. Maybe Jamal Anderson is that Sam kind of nickel linebacker. So I like that there's moving pieces. Now I want to kind of end with a little debate here because you sort of teed it up, and I feel like we need to talk about this. I think this is not one of the weaker rooms. I think cornerback's much thinner for one, but I think defensive tackle to me is by far the weakness, and that's because they lost, studs, right? They lost second-round draft pick Rukaroro. They lost Tyler Davis, who was a college player, was even better. And then they lost Peter Woods, which I feel like people aren't talking about. He's a defensive end next year. So you lose your three best guys, and you've got veterans, but Trey Williams has always been hurt. And when he does play, he's not 100%. His grades aren't great, and he doesn't look amazing. Capehart was awesome, but like Kylon Griffin, very limited sample size. So there's definitely a risk there. Peyton Page is good, but I don't know that you look at him as like a star, like a Tyler Davis or Peter Woods. I think that's the weakness of the defense. And you're hoping everything else makes up for it. Tell me why I'm wrong.
Well, I think Capehart maybe be like, regardless of position, I think he's a top 5 player on the team. Like, I think that he's one of those guys that has waited his turn. He's just been behind, really talented players his whole career, and he stuck it out. And those guys at Clemson tend to work out. I'll put my money on those guys every time. And he's just a big body. Like he really has like so much upside. I know that everyone wants to show the play from Notre Dame where he basically picked up the center and then made the play on like a short second down or third down. I think it was second down to make it a longer third down. But that's like that's DeMonte Capehart right there, is that he is just a game wrecker. And I think that that's what we're going to see this year from him. I think he's going to make a huge leap. And he's going to be one of those guys that gets drafted way higher than you think he's going to get drafted next year. Peyton Page is another guy that you could say that as well. I think that he's kind of waited his turn. I know that last fall camp, they really raved about him, basically saying, I think Dabo came out and said, Peyton Page is making a move, basically saying like he's coming, for one of those spots up top. And I don't know that anything's going to stop him. And then I'll just throw in the guy, Stephon Green. That's a guy we signed last year. He really popped in the spring game. I know that, our offensive line is what it is, but I think Stephon Green is going to have a huge career at Clemson if he stays. And then you have guys even that I haven't even mentioned yet, like Vic Burley, who had an injury last year, who can come in and play. And I think that I kind of interpret the Peter Woods situation like this, is that they felt so good about D tackle that they felt good enough to move Peter Woods out of that room, and they can still get the production they need. That's how I interpreted the move.
Okay. So you can read it the other way.
But I completely see what you're saying, though. You're taking the best player off your defense out of that room. So how can you say it's the best room? You know what I mean? Right. I completely understand your argument. I just think that they're taking them out based saying like, hey, Peter, we're good here. We need you out here because we're a little thinner at DN than what we want to be. But I just think you look at the corners, and I like Avion Terrell. For me, he's a top 5 player on the team, regardless of position. He's a true lockdown corner. I love that kid. I think he's going to have a huge career.
Agree.
And then Lucas, I think Jaden Lucas, who's just been, kind of injured throughout his career, had these shoulder injuries and things. I think that he still has potential to take the next step. So if you have Terrell, Lucas, and then Shelton Lewis, who got some playing time last year, but I think he still has quite a ways to go. I think he's a good player, but I think that he has some growth definitely before I kind of commend him as a starting cornerback. But I don't know. I guess it's fun to argue defense because the defense kind of seems to always deliver.
Right.
It's a lot more fun conversation than talking about offense.
Yeah, we can argue and say, oh, cornerback's a little thin. Also, I think they're going to be excellent.
Yeah.
So there's a lot less at stake here.
Absolutely.
Hey, thanks for joining. Why don't you tell folks where they can find your work before we get out of here?
Yeah, well, there's my Twitter handle. I do some podcasting for Clemson Sports Media's YouTube channel. Make sure you follow there as well. We do great work over there as well.
Hey, thanks for being here. I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed this video, you can help the channel grow in a couple ways. Like the video and leave a comment. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. I'd really appreciate it. Also, if you're a pet owner and you live in the upstate, I want to tell you about Ready Vets. Ready Vets offers immediate walk-in care when your pet can't wait. Owned by 2 Clemson alumni, they're open 7 days per week until 10 p.m. They're located in Taylor's, just over 10 miles from downtown Greenville and the Woodruff Road shopping district. Save them in your phone in case you ever need them.